Hello, everyone. In this series on 10 biblical prophecies that predict the return of Jesus Christ around 2030, we are discussing here the famous prophecy of the 70 weeks from Daniel. Daniel, the beloved prophet of God, received several prophetic revelations about the future of Israel, recounted in the Old Testament book that bears his name. He received notably a prophecy known as the prophecy of the 70 weeks. This prophecy should more precisely be called the prophecy of the 70 weeks. Or how? The reconstruction of Jerusalem reveals the date of the coming of Jesus Christ and the date of his return. The prophecy of the 70 weeks of Daniel is well known in the Christian world because it announces the exact year of the death of Jesus Christ. But we will see that by linking this prophecy with another prophecy in the book of Ezekiel and by connecting it with certain historical events, it also announces the year of the return of Jesus Christ. But first, we will explain how the prophecy of the 70 weeks reveals the year of the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. The prophecy of Daniel is important for Christians because it is precise in its announcement of the Messiah Jesus Christ, and because it is indisputable, as we can historically date the life of Jerusalem. It is a prophecy revealed to Daniel by the angel Gabriel in chapter 9 of the book of Daniel, verses 24 to 27. The 70 weeks of the prophecy are weeks of years where 1 day equals 1 year, 1 year. A week of 7 days is therefore worth 7 years, and 70 weeks are therefore 70 x 7 equals 490 years. The prophecy of Daniel is quite complex to explain, because the period of 70 weeks is divided into several periods which start at different dates. First, there is a period of 7 weeks that begins in 587 BC. Before Christ, then a period of 62 weeks that begins in 444 BC. And finally, a period of 1 week, the last one, which occurs at the time of the end of days. This last week ends with the return of Jesus Christ to initiate the millennium. The millennium is a period of about 1,000 years of the preeminence of Christianity over the entire earth, before the end of the world's history. To summarize and to keep it simple, the prophecy of Daniel indicates that 483 years will pass between the moment when God announces the reconstruction of the city of Jerusalem which had been destroyed, and the moment when God's Messiah, thus Jesus Christ, will be killed. This period of 483 years will be followed by a period of 7 years, a week of years, which corresponds to the final tribulation, that is, a series of trials. This tribulation will end by, and thanks to the return of Jerusalem. 483 years, plus your 7 years of tribulation equals 490 years. We indeed find the 70 weeks of the prophecy. The reconstruction period of 483 years is itself divided into 2 periods, a period of 49 years, 7 weeks of years, and a period of 434 years, 62 weeks of years. The 49 years correspond to the duration of the Hebrews' deportation to Babylon after their defeat by the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar in 587 BC. This exile will begin to end 49 years later, in 538 BC, when the Babylonians themselves are defeated by the Persians and their king Cyrus. King Cyrus will then authorize by decree the Jews to return from Babylon to Jerusalem and to rebuild Solomon's temple. God had announced to Daniel that 49 years would pass between the order to rebuild the city of Jerusalem, destroyed by war, thank you, and the arrival of a political leader, King Father Cyrus. And that is indeed what happened. I quote, 70 weeks have been decreed for your people and your holy city to put an end to transgression and to make an end of sin, to atone for iniquity and to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy and to anoint the most holy place. Then, in verse 25 it says, know and understand, from the time the word goes out to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the coming of an anointed one, a leader, there will be this week. Then, the week during which the streets and the walls will be rebuilt, but it will be in times of distress. Then, in verse 26, Ayah is the simplest. After 62 weeks, an anointed one will be cut off. People of a leader will come to destroy the city and sanctuary. 26, and the holy place, in a flood, the holy place, in a flood, the, finally, Kodiin. Verse 27, at the roundness. Finally, in verse 27, during 1 week, this leader will strengthen the covenant with many, Finally, in verse 27, during 1 week, this leader will strengthen the covenant with many. During half of the week, he will put an end to sacrifice and offering, and on a wing of the temple, there will be the abomination of desolation, until the decreed destruction is poured out on the desolator. The holy city mentioned by the angel is, of course, Jerusalem. The angel speaks of the advent of eternal justice, so his prophecy necessarily concerns the end times. It concerns the reign of God in a world purified from sin. This does not concern any historical moment, as humanity has never lived in a world of justice. Moreover, the angel then says to Daniel, "I have come to explain to you what will happen to your people at the end of days." This is written in chapter 10, verse 14. In fact, throughout the book of Daniel, there are several prophecies that are veiled because they overlap several different historical horizons, including that of the end times. The angel announces that the prophetic countdown of 483 years will begin from the moment an order is given to rebuild Jerusalem. One must be careful when reading the text of the Bible because sometimes the text speaks of the orders and actions of a leader who actually refers to a human political leader. And sometimes the text speaks of the Messiah, which has a religious meaning and refers to Christians. Jesus Christ, the Son of God sent by God. In some translations, the same word has been used to refer to the religious Messiah and the political leader, which distorts the understanding of the text. However, this order to rebuild Jerusalem was given by a king other than the Persian king Cyrus. The order was given by King Artaxerxes III of Persia, 20 years after the beginning of his reign. It is written in the book of the prophet Nehemiah, chapter 2, verse 1. It was an order to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem and not to rebuild the temple of Jerusalem, which had already been rebuilt at that time. The beginning of Artaxerxes' reign is generally estimated to be before Jesus Christ and its end at -424. Therefore, the date of the decree that triggers the fulfillment of the prophecy is estimated to be -444 or -445 before Jesus Christ, since it is 20 years after the beginning of the reign. As the Hebrews counted years of 360 days with their lunar calendar and not years of 365 days. Like us, it is necessary to convert the 483 years of the prophecy into years of 365 days. Thus, 483 years of 360 days, each represents a total of 483 x 360 equals 173,180 days. Converted into years of 365 days, this duration becomes 173,180 divided by 365 equals 476 years. Since the angel Gabriel specifically speaks about Daniel's people and the holy city, that is, Israel and Jerusalem, it is relevant to use the Jewish calendar to explain the prophecy rather than our own calendar. So, -444 BC, the date of the decree, plus 476 years equals +32. But since the year 0 does not exist, this brings us to the year 33, which is generally estimated as the date of Jesus Christ's death. Thus, the prophecy was fulfilled. Let us recall that the book of Daniel speaks of the time elapsed between the order to rebuild Jerusalem and the death of a Messiah who will not be replaced. The last 7-year period of Daniel's prophecy is to be compared to the 7-year period of tribulation endured by the Jews between 66 and 73 AD, when the Roman Emperor Titus besieged Jerusalem and destroyed the Second Temple. At the end of times, there will again be 7 years of tribulation, which will end with the glorious return of Jesus Christ. But in the meantime, the historical cycles of 483 years and 7 years are merely foreshadowings, announcements of what will happen at the end of times. It is already particularly remarkable that Daniel's prophecy announces the date of the advent of Jesus Christ in the world. We will now see how it also announces his return. There is a particular expression in Daniel's prophecy. This expression indicates that the period of 70 weeks will be repeated in human history. It will end with the arrival of the Antichrist, referred to as the devastator in the Bible, who will reign during the 7 years of tribulation, just before the return to Jerusalem. Thus, In Daniel 9, verses 26 and 27 of the Louis II Bible translation, it is written, "After the 62 weeks, one, that is to say, the Messiah, will be cut off, and he will have no successor. The people of a coming leader, that is to say, the Antichrist, will destroy the city and the sanctuary, and its end will come like a flood. It is decreed that the devastations will last until the end of the war. He will make a firm covenant with many for 1 week, and during the middle of the week, he will put an end to sacrifice and offering. The devastator, the Antichrist, will commit the most abominable things, until the ruin and what has been determined descends upon the devastator." The words, "and its end will come like a flood," correspond to the Hebrew term base etepe. This word is interpreted by some biblical scholars as meaning an event that endures due to a recurring pattern. In this case, the recurring pattern is the appearance of the Antichrist in history. What repeats is the famous cycle of 483 years until the final 7-year period preceding the return to Jerusalem. Thus, 483 years is precisely the time that elapsed between the birth of Jesus Christ and that of the Roman Emperor Justinian, estimated in 482 or 483 AD. Justinian is a major emperor of the period known as Late Antiquity. He was a devout Christian, the originator of Roman law, and the founder of the entire political organization of the Christian West. He was also the builder of the Hagia Sophia in Turkey. And above all, he was the promoter of the universality of the Christian Roman Empire. The era of Emperor Justinian marks the beginning of a period of approximately 1,000 years of Christian rule. Of course, it is a relative rule within the limits given by God, since Christianity was not universal at that time. But these 1,000 years of Christian expansion echo the millennium of the Apocalypse of St. John that we mentioned. That is to say, the period of peace and Christian rule over the entire earth for 1,000 years, which comes after the intervention of Jerusalem at the end of the events of the Apocalypse. Let's clarify here that there is no need to convert the 483 years into 476 years because of the Jewish lunar calendar, since here we are no longer talking about the history of Israel, but about the history of Christianity among all nations. So we are indeed using our solar calendar. In 1483, exactly 1,000 years after the birth of Justinian, Martin Luther was born, the founder of Protestantism, who tore apart the unity of Christendom in religious wars. This will eventually lead to the domination of the world by Anglo-Saxon Protestantism, through the power of England first, and then its colony, the United States. English Protestantism is itself the origin of the creation of Freemasonry, which will eventually take power in a large part of the world. Freemasonry considerably weakened Catholicism and even Christianity in general. The birth of Martin Luther thus marks the end of the first millennium of Christianity. At the same time as Martin Luther was active, the Turkish Suleiman the Magnificent had the walls of Jerusalem rebuilt. This reconstruction is estimated to have occurred around the year 1540-1541, but the date is not entirely certain. In any case, it is understood to be between 1527 and 1547. It was during this time that Suleiman the Magnificent had the Golden Gate, which opens onto the Temple Mount, walled up. He did this to prevent the arrival of the Messiah who, according to Jewish tradition based on a prophecy of Ezekiel, is supposed to arrive through this gate, the Eastern Gate. Indeed, in Ezekiel chapter 43 verse 4, one can notably read this excerpt from the prophecy about the throne of God at the end of times. I quote Ezekiel 43. "The glory of the Lord entered the house by the gate facing east. The Spirit lifted me up and brought me into the inner court. Behold, the glory of the Lord filled the house. And I heard a voice coming from the house, while the man stood beside me. This voice said to me, 'Son of man, this is the place of my throne, the place where I set my feet. And there I will dwell among the sons of Israel forever.'" Ezekiel 43 indeed speaks of a divine Messiah who triumphantly enters Jerusalem through a specific gate, the one facing east. The 490-year period for the return of Jesus Christ could therefore apply from this date, or near this date, which would bring us to 1540. Plus 490. equals 2030. Here again, we find a troubling coincidence. Once more, it is the reconstruction of Jerusalem, but this time by Suleiman the Magnificent, who, as in Daniel's prophecy, triggers the period of the 70 weeks. This period brings Jerusalem back in 2030, which is 2,000 years after his ministry. It is a symbolic date that aligns with other biblical prophecies announcing the same date. Finally, we can also note that a period of 490 years elapsed between the advent of the Jewish Messiah Shimon bar Kokhba and the Muslim Messiah Muhammad. In 132 AD, and for 3 years, like the duration of the ministry in Jerusalem, the famous Jewish leader Bar Kokhba presented himself as the long-awaited Messiah by the Jewish people. He led a failed revolt against the Romans. And after this revolt, the Jews were expelled from Jerusalem. 490 years later, in the year 622, the Hijrah took place. This date marks the fundamental moment when the Prophet Muhammad founded Islam by leaving Mecca to join Medina. It is yet another coincidence of history, too extraordinary not to see the hand of God in it. Thank you for listening to me. Feel free to share this information. And why not join us in the non-virtual world? Have a good day, and may God bless you.